Using Bezier curves to build paths in SwiftUI is a real pain. Let's do something about that. Hello and welcome to CodeSlicing. I'm Adam, lifelong coder and creator of PureSwiftUI. To show my affection for SwiftUI, we are going to create a love heart, and we're going to do it using Bezier curves. Now, if you just had a nasty reaction to me saying those words, that's perfectly normal, don't worry. Working with curves in SwiftUI, after all, is proper rubbish. Now, there are several reasons for this, which we will go into, but using layout guides and extensions in PureSwiftUI will have you wanting to create things using curves. Really, because they make the process such an easy and enjoyable one. And I'm going to show you how they do that right now. Right, so what I'm going to show you is how to trace an image or a shape using layout guides. And it is actually one of the most powerful features of layout guides is that you can overlay them on something you are trying to recreate. You'll see what I'm talking about. We've got a lot to do, so let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is define a VStack. And then I'm going to put a Z stack inside. I'm also going to give this some spacing. And then I've prepared a heart shape. Well, an image really that I'm going to use to trace over in this demonstration. I will provide the link if you want to follow along precisely, but you're obviously welcome to use anything you like. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to say image heart. That's the one I prepared ahead of time, which is obviously far too big. So we're going to bring that down using a lovely extension in PureSwiftUI called resized to fit, a size of 200. Okay, so that's brought us back to where we want to be. The next thing we're going to do is define our shape. Okay, that's going to be the thing we're going to be creating. Right, so we'll put that up here. We'll call it heart. And then we will put it over the top of the image like that. We'll give it a stroke of a black color with a line width of 2 so we can see it nice and easily. And now we need to define our layout guide. So when you're dealing with layout guides to trace over something, the one thing you want to be aware of is that you would like your coordinates to line up as closely as possible with points of interest on the image you're trying to recreate. In this case, there are 4 points of interest. There's one over to the left here. There's one up at the top, another one over to the right, and one down at the bottom. Now, I happen to know, because I may have done this particular shape before, is that I need a grid of 8 across and 10 down. So we'll define that up here like this. Private let heart layout config is a layout guide config grid with 8 columns and 10 rows. Now we can overlay that onto our shape. Layout guide, heart layout config. We'll also give this a frame of 200. And now we can show layout guides like this. Show layout guides is true. So if I resume that, we should see our layout guide put on top of the shape we are going to be recreating. When we're constructing a shape using a path, it's nice to see the path itself with a stroke. But if you want to see the result of your shape, then it's nice to actually have a shape that is filled as well, so you can see that. So that's why I put this in a VStack, so I can actually have another heart shape, but filled. Now, what are we going to fill it with? I'm going to fill it with a heart color, which I'm going to define up here. Let heart color is a color with 225 reds, 40 greens, and 48 blues, which happens to be precisely the same color as the original, which is nice. So if I resume now, we shouldn't see anything because, oh, look at that. Try again. So look, there's our shape. Not much to it right now. Let's start creating it. The first thing I'm going to do is define a type alias for each curve. Private type alias goes like this. We're going to call it curve. And that's going to be a tuple with a P of CG point, CP1 of CG point, and a CP2 of CG point. Now I can define my curve segments, but the first thing we need to do, of course, is to lay out our guide, right? So let's do that. Here's our layout guide, is the heart layout config laid out in our rectangle. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually define the 4 points that we are interested in. And thanks to layout guides and this grid layout we're using right now, that is very simple. So let P1, we're going to start here and move clockwise around the shape. So this is our first point. So P1 is G 0,3. Very easy. Let's just duplicate that for 2, 3, and 4. So point 2 is 4,2. Nice and simple. Point 3 is 8,3. And point 4 is 4,10. Lovely. So now what we need to do is define the curves, okay? We're going to put them in an array, so it's nice and easy to loop through that array. And all we need to worry about is defining the order of these curves and the control points for those curves. So let's start doing that. So we're going to define the top left curve. Okay. And since we're going clockwise, we can just call it curve 1. We're not actually going to declare a variable, but we will put a little comment. So this is C1. And we'll say, here are my curves, which is an array of curves. And the first one is going to be curve. And the curve itself is defined as the point it's going to and the control points on either side of the curve. So the point it's going to is actually P2. We start at P1 and we're going to P2. The next thing we need to define is the first control point, which is the control point around point 1 here. Okay. But before we actually define where these control points are, I'm just going to save myself a bit of trouble and just say that it is P1. Okay, I'm not going to deal with the actual locations of the control points right now. I'm just going to say that is P1. And the second control point is P2. Right? So we've got our first curve, if you like, defined. Let's do the next one, which is going to be curve 2 going clockwise. That's going to point 3. The first control point is point 2. The second control point is point 3. Like I said, we're just putting the control points on the points themselves for now. And then we move around again. And we say curve 3 is point 4. So we're going to point 4 from point 3. So The control point 1 is P3 and control point 2 is P4. The last curve, we're going to go back to point 1. And the first control point is point 4. And the second control point is point 1. Now we have our curves. For now, we will come back to this, trust me. And we're going to move to P1. Path, move, P1. So now we're on the first point. And now we just loop through our curves, okay? For curve, in curves. And we say path, curve, curve.p. That's the point that we're going to. We go control point 1 is curve CP1. Control point 2 is curve CP2. So if we resume, we should actually see our heart shape at this point. And there it is. Look at that. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. We've got absolutely nothing left to do. Well, we do have to change the frame to make it 200. We don't have a heart. What we've got is some kind of squashy diamond type shape, which is not what we're going for. Now we need to talk about control points. So let's have a little interlude to talk about what we need to know about control points and Bezier curves. There are 3 things you need to know. Right, here's a Bezier curve. Now it is a Bezier curve, it's just the control points are in the points themselves, so it becomes a straight line. However, let's make it more traditional. So we'll add a control point there and another one there. So the first thing you need to know is that the angle that the control point makes with the point will be the same as the angle the curve makes with that point. It's a tangent to the curve. So this controls the angle that the curve makes with the point. The second thing you need to know is without changing the angle, the distance that the control point is from that point will determine where the bulge is. Okay, so it kind of affects the shape of the curve. So as we move the control point around, these 2 things influence the shape of the curve. The third thing you need to know is that if you've got a curve going through a point, then the control points on either side of that point will determine whether or not you get a continuous curve. So it's only when the control points and the point form a straight line that you will get a continuous curve, which makes sense because they're both tangents to each of their curves. It doesn't even matter what angle that line is on. As long as it's straight, you will get a continuous curve. If they're not straight, you'll get a kink in your curve, which might be what you want for your design. But if you don't want that, you know what to do. So that's pretty much all you need to know to work with Bezier curves. If you want to get into the mathematics of it, I will leave a link in the description for you to have fun with. But in the meantime, let's get back to the code. So now we're all brought up to speed on what we need to know. We're going to set the control points for the first curve. All right? And we're going to set them like this. We're going to say for the first curve, this one up here, we're going to say that the control point 1 is at 0, 0. We're just going to take a guess, 0, 0. And we're going to guess that the second control point is 4, 0. It's not quite right. And now we run into the real problem with dealing with curves in SwiftUI, is that we cannot see our control points. We have to keep in our heads where these things are. We have to work them out. And we've solved one half of the problem, which is we can clearly define our control points using a grid system. We don't have to worry about calculating those points and the difficulties that arise from that. But we still can't see them. Well, we actually can see them because PureSwiftUI includes the ability to visualize your control points as you are constructing them. So drum roll, please. We are going to say show control points is true. And there they are. We can now see our control points. Now, this one's gone a bit nuts, but I'll explain that in a second. But now we can actually see where our control points are. Let's fix what's going on here, and then we'll talk more about this. Now, the reason this has gone a bit out of the ballpark is that the control points that you're seeing here are actually part of the path. And that's how it's implemented under the covers. It actually adds them to the path. And obviously that's a problem when you try to fill that path because, when you fill it, it doesn't really know what to do. Well, I mean, it knows exactly what to do. It's just not doing what we want it to do. And when you think about it, being able to see the control points is a debug feature. You're doing it in the design phase. This isn't what you're going to ship. You're doing it when you're debugging it. So instead of just showing the control points, what I'll do is I'll add a property to this shape called debug. Okay, and we'll do it like this. We'll say let debug, which is a Boolean, and in the constructor, we'll say debug bool equals false. And then we'll set it to debug. And instead of true, we'll use that value. So now if I resume, we'll see that the control points go away. But we can get them back by saying, okay, in my debug heart shape, the one I'm constructing, I'm going to set debug is true. So we've got our control points back. We don't have to worry about it messing up with our final image here. Awesome. Now, the great thing now is that all we're doing is we're having a conversation about where am I going to put my control points? Just like the same kind of discussion you would have if you were creating things in Photoshop, where you can see the control points and you just move them around until it gives you the shape you want. Let's mess about with these control points to see where we need to put them. Now, I think this one is probably okay. In fact, I know it's okay. Just FYI, I know that one is okay. The problem is with the middle one. And we can just play around with this. Because we're working in a grid system, we can just try things out, see where the control point moves and see what starts to look better. So the control point 2 is the one we're talking about here, and that's at 4. What if I move it to 3? Okay, to 2. Yeah, it's not right. 3 is better. 3 is probably the best or the closest to where we want to go, but it's not going high enough. That bulge is not coming out high enough. Now, as I said in the polar layout episode, if you use a value that is beyond the range that you've specified in your layout config up here, then it will actually extrapolate beyond the bounds. So we're quite at liberty to use minus numbers here. So I can say 3 minus 1. And look at that, that's perfect. Now all we do is we go around the shape, building up the control points. Now with symmetry, it's very easy to say, okay, so the next one must be, the control point 1 of curve 2 must be at 5, minus 1. Right, so we can do that, G, 5 minus 1. And we know from symmetry again, that the control point 2 for curve 2 is going to be 8, 0. G, 8, 0. Now we've only got to work out the control points for the bottom half of the heart. We know that to generate a continuous curve through a point, we need the control points on either side of the point to be in a straight line. So let's try 8, 6. Okay, not bad. Actually, that looks pretty good. If you wanted convexity to the bottom of your heart, then job done here. You really can play around with it, and that's what's so nice about this is that you can make these decisions based on artistic license rather than what's going on. Where are my control points? Which is such a step change from the native way of doing this. Which I don't even know how you would do this natively. It would be such a nightmare. So we're going to play around with this. I think that comes down a bit too far, to be honest. So let's go to 5. And then we look at control point 2, and I think I want it to come up a bit and to the right. So we're going to go 5 just past the center, and we're going to go to 8. Okay, so that's not high enough. Let's go to 7. Perfect. Look, we could try all these different ones. And as it moves around, we just see exactly what the one that we want. So symmetry again, we know that the control point 1 for the last curve is going to be, we want to come on this side of it. So we want to go to 3, 7. And then the last one, we want to mirror this. So it's going to be 0, 5. And look at that. We are done. In a very short period of time, relatively speaking, we've replicated the shape that we want to create. We didn't have to worry about calculating a single point. It is my hope that seeing how easy it is to work with Bezier curves now in SwiftUI actually gives you some inspiration to go and create something awesome. So now we can easily create complex shapes. It's time to start animating them. And that's what we're going to do in the next episode. So join me for that. It's going to be brilliant. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. See you next time.